Ant-Man 3 is a bankrupt enterprise, but Creed 3 was one hell of a surprise. Let's get into this weekend's box office because there's some good stuff to talk about today. Here we go. Renegade Online. Well, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment, turn that little red subscribe button to gray, hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. We've got a tale of two movies going on right now. Ant-Man 3 from Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Walt Disney Company, who has grossly underperformed even the paltry expectations coming in to its opening, its second, and now into its third weekend. And then we have Creed 3 from United Artists as part of an Amazon deal. That is coming into the theaters that is radically overperforming some of the projections that have come in up to its preview day on Wednesday and Thursday. Now, that has a lot to do with unexpected walk-up traffic, meaning that a lot of ticket pre-sales weren't there. So when websites like Box Office Pro go in early to track ticket pre-sales as a precursor or as a prediction to what opening weekend will be, if those pre-sales are light, they're going to assume that the opening weekend is going to be as well. But the always magic factor that you cannot account for until it happens is the walk-up traffic, which apparently Creed 3 got a significant amount of. Let's talk about some of these numbers. This was the chart on Friday, March 3rd, as we don't have complete numbers for the weekend for each of these films, although we do have a complete estimate for Creed 3 so far. But I want you to take a look at this. Creed 3 on Friday, which included Wednesday night and Thursday night previews, 22.1 million. Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaiba at 4.2 million, including its previews, and Ant-Man and the Wasp at 3.1. Also, Cocaine Bear at 3.1. Yes, you saw that correctly. A big, major Marvel Cinematic Universe title on day 15, the first day of its third weekend, was beaten out by Cocaine Bear, or almost beaten out by Cocaine Bear. We don't have the final numbers yet, but let's just say they're on par, who is only on day 8 of its release. I mean, that should not ever happen, and that should tell you right off the bat what kind of trouble Ant-Man 3 is in. Let's go keep looking. Now again, at the time I'm recording this, this would only include some of the Friday numbers, that $3 million, as the Saturday and Sunday at this point has not been factored in. But if we look at what Demon Slayer did this past weekend, Demon Slayer right now has an estimate of about $10 million, and Ant-Man Quantumania is coming in at or under that point. So it's very possible by the time this weekend concludes that there might be another $7 million yet accounted for in this figure. So that would bring the total of the domestic box office somewhere up around 184 to 185 million. International box office still has to come in, but at this point, it doesn't look like it's going to be all that much better. And that means that even after a full 3 weekends in release, it is unlikely that Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania is even going to breach $400 million at this point. This movie is done, folks. I think $500 million is almost entirely off the table, and this movie may conclude its box office run both here in the U.S. and abroad, maybe somewhere around $450 million, and that is a big loss for the Walt Disney Company. That means at that point, effectively any and every dollar that they spent on the marketing campaign for this film, above and beyond the $200 million they spent to produce it, has all been burned up in flames. And that figure, as we continue to remind folks for these Marvel movies, $100 million is a very low floor. It's at least that much, but more likely it's probably closer to 125, if not even slightly higher. Marvel and Disney spend a lot of money on these things. They need to get the word out because they need not only the films to do well, but they need merchandise sales to pick up. We have covered how badly MCU merchandise sales have suffered since the end of 2019 when Infinity War and Endgame concluded, the whole Infinity War saga. Phase 4 and Phase 5 have not sold anywhere near the level of merchandise that those first 3 phases did. The characters in this new Phase 4 and 5 era just are not that popular. So let's head in here to the main article from Anthony D'Alessandro, MGM's Creed 3, $58+ million, a franchise record opening, a game changer for Amazon Studios. This is the Sunday box office update as of 9:07 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Amazon bought MGM, a motion picture studio, for $8.5 billion back in May of 21. And this weekend, the streamer had their first taste of how wonderful a box office blockbuster is, as MGM United Artists' Creed 3 opened to a franchise record of $58.6 million. That's domestic. Also the highest debut ever for a sports movie. At this level, Creed 3 stands to also become the highest-grossing Creed title stateside at $150, besting Creed's $109.8 and Creed 2's $115.7, while also providing a lot of lift to a domestic box office looking to return to pre-COVID levels. Now, those projections are tremendous, and let me explain so everybody understands how good this is for Creed 3. With $115 million in its domestic run for Creed 2, the expectations now being $150 for this one, what do we keep talking about here on Valiant Renegade? Ticket price inflation. Ticket prices are up since Creed 2 came out, somewhere in the realm of about 35% or so on average. That means if the second movie did 115 and this new movie is expected to do at least 150, that means that all the audience has come back from Creed 2 to Creed 3. They've held the same number of butts in seats. The revenues are a lot higher, but when you account for how many tickets that actually breaks down to, this is something that not even the Marvel Cinematic Universe in anything through Phase 4 and now into Phase 5 has been able to achieve. It's astonishing, and my hat's off to the folks who made this movie and to Creed's run so far. I hope it continues for them, and I wish the movie well, even with Sly not in it. Now, as I remind folks, the early projections coming into this based on ticket pre-sales were obviously incorrect. The walk-in traffic was not accounted for. And that, combined with the fact that Amazon United Artists also pre-announced the actual release date for the physical media set for this movie, for Creed 3, the Blu-rays and the 4K discs, before the movie even opened, seemed to initially indicate that the studio itself just didn't really have that much faith in how good the box office was going to be. Certainly it was going to be admirable, and certainly Amazon's streaming power was going to make up for the losses for video release, which we've seen places like the Walt Disney Company do. When Ant-Man 3 leaves the theaters, it's going to go right over to Disney+. And that's going to be the end of it. Disney's going to write a check from the right pocket to the left pocket to cover the losses at the theater. But in this case, it doesn't look like that Amazon is going to have to cut a check to cover losses. They're just going to simply cover a check to make sure all of the talent and the producers that made this film are compensated for the streaming services taking of the picture and putting it onto their own proprietary platform. But that's a big difference in this case, because Creed 3's production budget was only $75 million. I say only. Certainly that's still quite a bit of money. But when you compare it to an MCU title that typically come in these days at $200 to $250 million, that's an easy hurdle to climb. Let's assume they even spent another $50 to $75 million on global marketing. This movie really only needs to bust about $300 million on the high end to reach its break-even point. And that's something that, after this opening weekend, shouldn't be terribly difficult. We're looking at least $58 million or so in the domestic market, and we're looking at perhaps another $35 to $40 million from the international side of things. Now, if Creed 3 only spent $50 million, or even slightly less than that on global marketing, which, again, these days is a very difficult thing to do, everything's just gotten much more expensive, then that means maybe $200 to $250 million, probably closer to $250 million would be about the lowest that I would go to assume that this movie reaches a break-even point at the box office. But it already has a great start. And if word of mouth for this actually holds up well, then that is likely to happen. But even if it doesn't, they make up for it on the back end. This is kind of a new thing for Amazon, but I would prefer this movie to actually make its bank back at the box office than have to do a little accounting dance at the end of the day to make it work. But nothing, and I mean nothing, is going to save Ant-Man and the Wasp at this point. It's one thing for Amazon to have to cover maybe losing $10 or $20 million at the box office and make it up on the back end with Prime. It's another thing for the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Walt Disney Company to have to do the same thing with much larger losses over and over and over and over again through almost the entirety of Phase 4. At least the films that the Walt Disney Company released, not the one that Sony released called Spider-Man No Way Home. But as we're looking right now with Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, we're looking at a movie that is going to have a $100 million loss, at least on the table of discussion here at this point. If this movie does indeed finish up around $450 million, which is very likely to happen right now, we're looking at a pretty significant loss for the Walt Disney Company, at least around $75 million, but it could be higher depending on what exactly they spent at the end of the day to market this film. We know there was a lot of reshoots involved. This was a film that was supposed to originally come in around $160 million production budget, and that ballooned to $200 million after a bunch of reshoots were done. And don't forget, we just saw the Walt Disney Company move The Marvels from a major summer release at the end of July all the way out to November, basically switching places with The Haunted Mansion, another Disney release. Why? Well, Ant-Man didn't do so well, and they're probably going to engage in even more reshoots for the Marvels now before the movie releases. That means more money in addition to the original budget that they had slated just for principal photography. That means a lot more money than they had allocated to the original budget for additional post-production VFX. Marvel is notorious for doing this in terms of changing things last minute and forcing VFX houses to work around the clock for much higher than normal rates just to cover these things in a rush job. Stay tuned to this channel. We're going to keep covering all this as time goes on, and make sure that you're here today at 6 p.m. Eastern on Sunday, March 5th to catch the live show where we're going to talk a lot about this in more detail. And we've got some fresh numbers to cover from both AMC Theaters and Cinemark Regal Theaters, the two largest theater chains in the U.S. They just had their earnings calls in the last couple of weeks, and we've got some new data to cover with you so you have a better understanding of how the box office works, how rentals work, and how these movie studios and distributors get paid so you know if a movie is making money or not. Until then, leave a comment below with your thoughts, hit that like and subscribe button if you're not already subscribed, share this sucker out, and do please take care.